Okay, so you know how everyone always gets excited about the Oscars?
Oh, yeah.
And it feels like the best picture is always the biggest deal.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes, and we were talking about this in the stuff you sent me,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of seems like some of those movies that win,
Yeah.
they don't really stick with people the same way.
Right.
You know? Like years later, we're not talking about them with the same excitement.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So that's what we're going to dig into today.
Somebody.
You said over all this interesting stuff about 21st century Best Picture winners and how some of them,
Yeah.
well, a lot of people think they're not as good as maybe we thought they were at the time.
Yeah. It is interesting to go back and look at those films.
Right.
Because they were so celebrated, when they won.
Totally.
And to see which ones are still kind of part of the conversation.
Exactly.
And which ones have maybe faded a little bit.
Yeah, and your sources really make you think about why that is. So basically what we're going to do is figure out why some of these movies that won Best Picture maybe haven't held up over time.
Right.
And, it's not just that some of them are slow.
Yeah.
The stuff you sent is a lot more interesting than that.
Yeah, I mean, the sources define this idea of a film being boring in a way that goes beyond just the pacing.
Okay.
So it's not just like, is it a fast movie or a slow movie? It's more about like, do you connect with the characters?
Right.
Does the story really grab you? And do you walk out of the theater and, still feel engaged with it days or weeks later?
Okay, interesting.
And, that's regardless of what critics might have said at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, yeah, it's more nuanced than just like, oh, it's slow.
Yeah. So let's dive into some specific movies then.
Okay, sounds good.
One that your sources mentioned a few times is The King's Speech.
Okay.
From back in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the story itself is really interesting, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
King George VI having to overcome his stammer.
Yeah, and Colin Firth was incredible.
Oh, he was fantastic.
Definitely deserved that Oscar.
For sure.
Okay.
But your sources make this point that maybe it's not as exciting as some other movies about royalty.
Yeah, that's one of the arguments.
Okay.
Like, it doesn't have that same visual grandeur or the kind of dramatic intensity that you see in some of those really epic royal dramas. It focuses more on the characters, which is great. It's done really well.
Oh, right.
But maybe it's not as like visually spectacular.
Got it. One of your sources even said it felt kind of like a really well-made documentary.
Oh, interesting.
And when you think about the other films that were nominated that year, like The Social Network, all that fast talking and how relevant it felt to what was happening then, or Black Swan.
Yeah.
So dark and visually striking. And then Inception, which was just mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah, completely different.
So compared to those, The King's Speech does feel kind of, well, a little more low-key.
Yeah, you could say that.
So it did a great job telling this important historical story, and the acting was top-notch.
Right.
But maybe it's not the kind of film that really stays with you.
Yeah, or had that same kind of cultural impact.
Right.
That some of the others from that year had.
Okay, so moving on then.
Okay.
The Artist won in 2012.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
It was such a big deal at the time.
Definitely.
Everyone was talking about it being silent and in black and white.
It was totally unique.
It really was.
Like, you didn't see anything else like that.
Exactly.
And your sources talk about how charming it was and how impressive it was technically.
Right.
Like, it was clearly a love letter to old Hollywood.
Right.
But they also kind of suggest that maybe the novelty of it was the main thing.
Oh, okay.
Like, it was different, so people loved it.
Interesting.
But maybe that wore off for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's what the sources say.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that there was no dialogue, which obviously was an artistic choice.
Right.
But it seems like it might have been a barrier for some people.
Yeah, some people just want to hear the characters talking.
For sure.
And the love story was nice.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like a groundbreaking love story.
Right. It didn't reinvent the wheel or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And, at that time, there were so many movies doing new things with technology and storytelling. And so it seems like The Artist maybe felt like a step back.
Yeah, like a beautiful throwback.
Right.
But a throwback nonetheless.
And maybe it didn't really have a lasting impact beyond the awards.
Yeah, that seems to be the feeling from the sources.
Okay, so let's talk about Green Book now.
Okay.
Which won Best Picture in 2018. This is definitely a film that wanted to make people feel good.
For sure.
It's about race relations and how these two guys from different backgrounds form this friendship on a road trip. But the sources also point out that it got a lot of criticism because people felt like it oversimplified some really complex social issues.
Yeah, they said it presented racial harmony as something that was achieved too easily.
Okay.
And so it kind of turned this really important and difficult topic into something that felt like a light road trip movie.
And of course, Mahershala Ali and Viggo Mortensen were amazing.
Oh, yeah, their performances were fantastic.
But the story itself, it was pretty predictable.
Kind of a classic buddy movie structure.
Yeah, and it had that very feel-good vibe throughout, which apparently some people didn't like.
They felt it was a little too simplistic.
Yeah, and then there were all those controversies about whether it was historically accurate.
Right. That definitely didn't help.
So all of that kind of added up to what your sources call an underwhelming legacy for Green Book.
Yeah, it wanted to be this uplifting story.
Right.
But it seems like maybe it didn't really connect with people on a deeper level.
Interesting. Okay, now, Crash from 2005.
Oh,
okay. Crash. This is a film that caused a lot of arguments right from when it won.
It sure did.
I mean, it tackled these really important issues of race and prejudice, but people had very strong feelings about it on both sides.
Yeah. Your sources call it a highly debated winner.
Okay.
Some people really praised it at the time for being willing to talk about these racial tensions in America.
Yeah.
But then a lot of other people thought it was too heavy-handed.
Okay.
And that it felt kind of contrived.
And then there's the whole thing with Brokeback Mountain.
Oh, yeah.
Which a lot of people felt should have won that year. And the sources definitely talk about that.
Yeah, a lot of people still think Brokeback Mountain was robbed.
And that just made the whole thing with Crash even more controversial.
Exactly.
And it's fascinating how people's opinions on Crash seem to have changed over time.
Yeah, that's something the sources pick up on.
Like its initial impact has faded. And the way it deals with racism, which some people thought was really bold at the time.
Right.
Now a lot of people think it's actually pretty simplistic, even manipulative.
Yeah, the sources use that word.
Okay, so let's move on to The Shape of Water then.
All right.
Guillermo del Toro's movie from 2017.
Yeah, beautiful film.
It was visually stunning.
The visuals were just incredible.
And the whole idea of a woman falling in love with a sea creature.
Yeah, so unique.
Like nothing you'd ever seen before.
Definitely not your typical love story.
But your sources mentioned that even though it looked amazing, a lot of people found it hard to connect with emotionally.
Yeah, some people found it strange.
Okay.
And slow and just difficult to get into.
It seems like it really divided audiences and critics.
Yeah, some people thought it was a masterpiece, and others thought it was all style and no substance.
Right, and the sources actually call it one of the more divisive Best Picture winners recently.
Yeah, it definitely sparked a lot of debate.
And that actually brings up an interesting point the sources make.
Oh, what's that?
They talk about this idea of the English patient effect.
The English patient effect. Okay.
Yeah, so basically they're saying that these long and often kind of serious dramas seem to do really well at the Oscars.
They tend to win a lot.
Yeah, and they're using The English Patient from 1996 as the main example.
Okay.
Which, let's be honest, was a little bit of a slog for some people to get through.
It was long.
Very long.
And sucked.
And they connect that to some of these 21st century winners, like 12 Years a Slave and The Revenant.
Yeah, both incredibly powerful films.
Oh, for sure.
But very intense.
Yeah. And long.
And the argument is that sometimes these kinds of films can feel almost like homework. Like you feel like you should watch them.
Right.
Because they're important, but they're not necessarily enjoyable to watch.
Yeah.
But like you admire them.
Right.
But you don't necessarily want to watch them again. So it's like you appreciate them, but you don't love them.
Yeah. Okay. So to contrast that a little.
Okay.
The sources talk about No Country for Old Men.
Oh, yeah.
From 2007.
That's a great film.
It is. Yeah. And it seems like it's really stood the test of time.
Yeah, people still talk about it and praise it.
And your sources highlight the storytelling.
So tense. Yeah. You're on the edge of your seat the whole time.
Yeah. And the performances are incredible.
Oh, yeah. Just unforgettable.
And when you compare it to some of the other winners we've talked about, it really makes you think about what makes a Best Picture winner truly great.
Yeah, what makes it deserving of that award.
Right. And that kind of leads into this idea of Oscar bias.
Oscar bias.
Yeah, which the sources talk about. Like, they suggest that maybe the Academy sometimes plays it safe.
Okay.
It's like maybe they tend to choose movies that are, well, kind of middle of the road.
Okay.
That have a wide appeal, but maybe aren't that groundbreaking or challenging.
Yeah.
And they mention Green Book and The King's Speech again as examples of films that maybe fit into that category.
So not necessarily bad films.
Right.
But maybe not the most exciting choices.
Yeah, and so the sources asked this question.
Okay.
What should the Oscars be for?
That's a good question.
Should they be about rewarding innovation and pushing boundaries?
Yeah.
Or should they be about recognizing films that are more traditional?
Right.
And that maybe appeal to a wider audience?
It's a tough one.
It is.
Because you want to celebrate great filmmaking.
Right.
But you also want to recognize films that people actually connect with.
Exactly. And then there's this whole idea of rewatchability.
Oh, yeah.
Which the sources bring up. Like, they're saying that a truly great film isn't just something you watch once.
Right, yeah. You want to watch it again.
Right. And again.
Find new things in it each time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But some of these Best Picture winners, they kind of fade away after the Oscars are over.
Yeah. They don't have that staying power.
And so the sources are saying that maybe how much you want to rewatch a film is a sign of how good it really is.
That makes sense.
And then there's the whole Oscar hype. You know how there's all this buzz around a movie when it wins.
For sure.
But your sources point out that that doesn't always last.
Sometimes it fades pretty quickly.
Exactly.
Right.
Like public opinion can change. What was a big deal one year might be forgotten a few years later.
Especially as our culture changes.
Right. And we can't forget about the whole politics of Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
Your sources talk about how campaigning and studio backing.
And even social movements.
Right. All of that can influence who wins.
For sure. It's not always just about the art of filmmaking.
Exactly. And that makes you wonder if the movies that win are always the ones that really deserve to.
It's a good question.
So basically what we've learned from all this stuff you sent is that just because a movie wins Best Picture doesn't mean it's actually a great film.
Right.
Or that it's going to have a lasting impact.
And sometimes the movies that win are actually kind of boring.
Or maybe even misfires.
Yeah, the sources use that word.
So it's a good reminder that those golden statues don't always equal cinematic magic.
Yeah. The Oscars aren't always right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, think about the Best Picture winners we haven't even mentioned today.
Oh, okay.
And think about the ones that you thought were maybe a little boring or that you haven't thought about in years.
Yeah.
Because maybe the Oscars got it wrong.
That's something to think about.
It definitely is.
For sure.
Okay, well, this was fascinating.
Yeah, I enjoyed this.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, thanks for listening.
See ya.
And we'll see you next time.